welcome back to Wrote Reviews. I'm Baz Collins, and this is my co-host,
Vance Bastian.
Yes. So, yeah, you're up, I'm down.
I know, I've seen it.
Okay, all right. That way we don't point like this.
True.
Anyways, getting back to the show. Today we have a groundbreaking film that has pretty much slipped off the radar in queer films.
Historically groundbreaking. Historically
groundbreaking. So I want to kind of set the stage for this film, and the film we're talking about is Making Love. It was released. Put my dentures back in. It was released in 1982. I had just graduated from high school. I think it came out towards the end of the year, and I had graduated in June, I think it was, early June. Anyways, I was on one of my first queer dates, and we chose to see this movie. Now, there had been some talk in queer circles that this movie was coming out, and all the gays were freaking out over Harry Hamlin playing gay. He had just done Clash of the Titans.
Okay.
So he was really starting to make a name for himself, and this was a huge step for him as an actor to do this film. It is highly featured in Celluloid Closet, which we just reviewed.
One movie was so bold as to depict homosexuality as an act of love, not violence. So Hollywood had to warn the public.
This was 1982. There hadn't been any gay characters in leading roles, and it was a big jump.
Okay. The truth is, I have gotten into a lot of different scenes. I'm a writer. I have to open myself up to new things, expand my horizons. Bart, Zach, why don't you just say it? I'm gay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was very hard to cast. The men were hard to cast because every one of their advisors, both Harry Hamlin and Michael Arden Keene, told them not to possibly play someone who was gay that would destroy their career.
There was the general perception, at least in the early 80s, I don't know what it's like now, but that Hollywood was pretty much of a cowboy town, and a straight cowboy town. I'm sure that inside of me there is the same homophobia that we all share. If I see a guy who's playing a gay role, I'll question it. I'll say, well, wow, is he gay? And why I do that, I don't know. But then I'll stop myself and say, hey, that's really ridiculous. You know, you've been there, you've done that. You know, the question is, why do we care? I mean, who cares? I'll do that.
The studio, this ownership of the studio changed hands. A new person came in who was not from the film world, nor the intellectual world, nor the world of letters and arts. And I had the unpleasant task of running in a screening room for this man and his lovely wife and daughters, the rough cut of the film. Now, none of my colleagues would be there. They were all afraid. So I was there by myself, sitting in the back. He was sitting, up front in the small screening room. He was squirming all during the movie. He just couldn't sit still. And at the part in the movie where the two men embrace and kiss, he jumped up and he said, "You made a goddamn faggot movie," and stalked out.
The day it opened, happened to be in Miami. We sat down, the movie started, and as the movie progressed, you sensed the audience growing more and more uncomfortable with what was going on the screen. It kept escalating, and when they had the first kiss, you thought that, there was an explosion in the theater. People panicked. I mean, it was pandemonium. People started, like, storming up the aisles, and at that point, I just left.
So it was people didn't know it was coming. The studio was very nervous about releasing it, and all of that is covered in Celluloid Closet. If you go and check that movie out, I talk about it a little bit in our review. But what people need to know is there is only one other film I could think of, and it was highlighted in Celluloid Closet too, that showed male intimacy close to the level that Making Love does. And that was Sunday, Bloody Sunday. And it was a British film. Now, what the story is about, it's about a happily married couple. One, the woman, the wife in the story, played by Kate Jackson. She plays Claire. She is a TV executive who's moved from PBS to a regular channel, and so she's trying to build a name for herself in the TV industry. And then you have Michael Ontkean, who is the husband of the pair. His name is Zach, and
He's a doctor.
He is a
He's a freshly new doctor.
Yeah, freshly new doctor. And they've been married for 8 years. When the movie begins, they are about to buy a big house, because right now they have a kind of a smallish apartment. And they're about to buy a big house because they want to start raising a family. So that's the general context. The subcontext, there's the second storyline that builds, is Michael Ontkean's character, Zach, is exhibiting a curiosity and questioning of what he's attracted to. And even when he explains it later in the story, he says it's always been bubbling there. Maybe he never gave it any credence. He suppressed it. He pushed it down. But it is a coming out story in a very adult way. And what I want to kind of get people to understand, you have to watch this movie, and you have to, I'll tell you right now, all the woke snowflakes, you may find a lot of flaws with the film. But you have to understand the historical context of what it was like back then to be queer and out. You didn't have social media. The only sphere you had as a gay person were the people you met face to face. That was it. That was all you had. And whoever was at the club and, or whatever social strata you moved in, that was all you had. It wasn't like you knew somebody in New York that you corresponded with all the time, that you'd met, remotely. It just didn't exist. So you have to think of the world in those terms.
And the other point I would like to add here is that in the late 70s, early 80s, in many states, even a gay act of intimacy was illegal. It was a punishable, prisonable offense.
Right, exactly. Lawrence v. Texas had not happened yet.
Right.
So, with that in mind, I do want to read one of the reviews that someone gave, and I think it is pretty spot on. This was his 10 out of 10 review, and you can find it on IMDb. The gentleman's name is Bradley Matchett, and he posted this on April 10th of 2004. So, what he wrote was, a totally underrated, groundbreaking film. I remember hearing about this film long before it came out, living in a small eastern Ontario town in Canada in 1982, a town with an army base no less. I thought that as much as I wanted to, my chances of seeing this film were pretty slim, unless I could somehow make it to a big city. Finally, I lucked out, and the film did come to our town as a part of a double bill with Neil Simon's I Ought to Be in Pictures. Child, if there was ever a worse pair-up, I don't know what, but there is a double bill here, so at least, my comment from the last review, this is when we used to do this kind of thing. Anyways, I remember watching as this movie, the second feature, started. The silence descended upon the entire theater. You could have heard a pin drop. As the movie progressed and we got to the scene where Zach and Bart lovingly kissed for the first time, there was pandemonium in the theater. It seemed like half the audience got up. People were yelling abusive epithets at the screen and storming out of the theater in droves. As a young man on the brink of committing suicide because of feelings I didn't understand or had no relation to, this movie saved my life. For the first time in my life after watching this film, I could identify with someone else, and I knew there were other people like me in this world. I thought then, and I think now, 22 years later, that all of the people involved with this film took tremendous chances and showed great courage in seeing to it that this movie was made. Say what you will about the soap opera type plot and making the movie more palatable for mainstream taste. The fact remains that this was in its time a groundbreaking film. I know many other people who have been profoundly touched by this film. Several years ago, I ran a group for gay men in various stages of coming out. One night, I showed them my own personal copy of this film. Nearly all who were viewing it for the first time were still totally mesmerized and awed by the courage shown by all who were involved in the film, particularly Harry Hamlin and Michael Ontkean. Both of these actors were already popular, established actors at the time this film was made, and both of them took tremendous risks with their careers by taking these parts. Playing gay for pay, I'm just adding this here, playing gay for pay had only started to happen. So this was even before we had the straight cis actors playing, it was still in the beginning stages. There were very few actors who wanted to go there, and very few actors were advised to go there.
Yeah, I was going to say this really wasn't cool until Philadelphia came out, and Tom Hanks and Antonio Banderas made it okay.
Right, and that was many years later.
And that was many decades later.
Yeah, so both of these actors were already popular, established actors in this film when it was made, and both of them took tremendous risks with their careers by taking these parts. For a movie to actually show two men in a loving relationship and to actually show two men kiss each other on the lips was amazingly brave. As was pointed out elsewhere on the IMDb board, where he posted this review, Tom Hanks and Antonio Banderas would not even kiss in the critically acclaimed Philadelphia. And that was many years later. Kate Jackson was fresh off Charlie's Angels when she took the part of Claire. Kate did a wonderful job in this film and held her own against two powerful actors. Her powerful speech to her husband after he comes out to her gave many women the words to say to their husbands. All of these years later, I don't think there is a finer coming out film than Making Love. So with that context, I will add that, like I said, I went on probably one of my first gay dates. I was just out of high school. And I remember we went to go see this. It was quite exciting. There were a number of gay people in the theater. You knew, it's the old gay line. When you know. And you could find them. But there were enough people who were burgeoning Harry Hamlin fans. There were people who loved Kate Jackson, and this was her first film she did where she was trying to break the mold of being Sabrina in Charlie's Angels. So she wanted something very different. And Harry Hamlin, and Michael Ontkean, they were really just starting to go strong with their careers when this came out. So it was incredibly brave of them. I remember when it got to the point where Michael and I can't think of his name now. Michael and Harry, Zach and Bart, respectively, when they first go to kiss, it was, you could feel a ripple in the theater amongst people. And I had this very, 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 very strange feeling that I was so validated in that moment of seeing two men being very intimate with each other and vulnerable with each other. And at the same time, my hackles were going up because as queer people, we're super sensitized to our environment. And you take two young, late teen boys who are at this movie, and you get that feeling coming at you where you feel enormously like, oh my God, this is real, I can have this. And then you have it at the same time where you're feeling people getting up and saying some of the most horrendous things out loud so that everybody hears it. It was the most bizarre feeling I'd ever felt. And so every time I watch it, when I rewatched it to do this review, I went through those emotions again. I really felt my hackles go up because I knew when that moment happened. It was so indelibly pushed into my head of what it was like in the theater at that time that I knew we had to review it. So that's all of the context I will say about the movie. There is one story, though, that I want to add, which I think is kind of fucking cool. And I am a huge Roberta Flack, and I had totally forgotten that Roberta had recorded the title track to the film. And unfortunately, if you watch it on, I think YouTube has it, if you watch it, you don't get to hear the song at the very end. But she recorded the song for it. And this was at a time when they had started to incorporate songs that were related to the movie. This was, just shortly after Star Wars. So things were starting to happen where they started to use, it was during the 80s, before Top Gun and all those started using modern pop music as to embellish the film. So she recorded the song Making Love. And here's the bit of trivia about that song. When Roberta Flack was asked by Hotspots magazine if she was nervous about recording the title song, knowing the movie's content, Flack responded, "Afraid of singing a song about love? Never. I was so glad when that song charted. People who did not know that song was about the love between two men loved that song. I would talk about it in my shows about how love is love. Between a man and a woman, between two men, between two women. Love is universal, like music." Which is a powerful statement for someone to make at that time. And Roberta Flack had a major singing career. I mean, she still is a singer today, but she was at the height of her career when she did this. So a number of people took a risk for it. So with all of that now out in the open, what did you think of Advance? I have been dying to know what you thought about this.
Well, the first thing I should say is because I was young when this came out, and it's not on any streaming platform, so it's never been put in front of me as you might want to watch this. Well, you might want this. This might be good for you. I didn't know the movie existed until we reviewed Celluloid Closet. So this was my first experience, my first awareness of it even. It is not found on streaming platforms. You can purchase it, or some libraries have it. I actually checked my local library, and they did have it available for checkout. So depending on how open your community is, you may find it there. I encourage you to watch it. It is historically important. There's an element of the filming I want to go into because it hit home hard for me, in that the characters that revolve around Zach, so Zach's the doctor, the husband who's coming to know himself, but both his lover, Bart, and his wife, Claire, have on-camera moments, almost, I don't want to say documentary style, but kind of, in that they're just there with the camera, talking to the camera about their experiences.
Talking to the audience directly, yeah.
Talking to the audience, yeah, basically. But it's almost like, they step out of the story for a moment to just relate something about the experience. And I know a woman who went through what Claire went through, almost verbatim, except they weren't a doctor and a TV exec. They were slightly below that in terms of economic means. And I remember being there for her. She actually turned to me for help after her husband came out to her because she knew I was gay and she didn't know anything. I mean, there's a scene in the movie where Claire goes and talks to a gay man because she wants to make sure her husband's going to be okay, but she doesn't get it. And I had that experience of being that gay man. And so I was actually on Claire's side through almost all of this film because I knew someone who went through exactly that. And that colored my perception of the film because I wasn't watching it for gay men like me, and most audiences won't be. They won't need to at this point. Our society has progressed to a point where you don't need to watch this to find a gay man like yourself. So I watched it for the woman who was affected by this situation. And again, I know it's historical. Our reality doesn't tend to lead to this situation anymore. It can still happen. It's a lot more rare.
And even when it does happen, I mean, Philip Schofield in Britain came out after being married for almost 30 years, and he had grown children, and you know, so and his wife, though she struggled, they all supported him in his new life, you know. So when it does happen, we now have the dialogue and we now have the context. So I think women deal with this better.
Well, anybody who's affected deals with it better. I don't want to, because it can go both ways.
Yeah, yes, it can still go awry. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it could also be the wife who comes out to her husband.
Right. Sure.
So, but my point is, I watched it for the people who were affected by the situation, because very often, especially if you're the one coming out, it is so me focused. You don't see anybody else's pain. And for that reason, I loved it. And I think it's a movie that has to be shared with families who are facing coming out situations, because I do think it was handled so gracefully. It was also handled, you know, late 70s soap opera style. That part of the review was dead on accurate, like down to the soap opera music and pacing. I will warn you, the pacing in this film, 1970s all over again. But the story is still relevant. And for that reason, I recommend it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like I said, I related my stories about it. It is a pivotal movie in my life. It is a milestone in my life because I lived through when it was released. And, you know, you have to remember back then, videotape machines were available and, you know, movie rentals had just started. But this wouldn't have been the rental. Right. It's not ubiquitous like it is now. You know, where we can just get a digital file and watch a movie or whatever, stream it. This is a moment where, you know, when you were buying the ticket, you knew what you were in for, being a queer person, but you didn't know what everybody else was going to think. And so there was some trepidation. And I think the film suffered for that. You know, it is soap opera tropey. It almost could be a made-for-TV movie, with the exception of the intimacy parts of it. Although nowadays that would be nothing compared to what we have now.
Yeah, they really didn't show much. And
and what's really interesting, just historical fact, and I think I said this on the Celluloid Closet one. Harry and Michael did not film the real intimate love scene that goes in shadows. That was done by two gay porn actors who happened to have body types and looks that could be done in shadow in the film. So there were limits. There were limits of what would happen. The kiss was about as far as Harry and Michael went to protect their careers, I'm assuming. And I think it's interesting because I don't remember for like a couple of years after that Harry and Michael were seen in anything. And I think Kate kind of had to find her way after it. It was a hard blow to all of them. Everybody who made this film took it on the chin, took one for the queer community. And that's one of the reasons why I think this film needs to be more lauded and shared much more, because this was a major risk. And for the queer community, I think it pays off. And I agree with the gentleman who posted that whole review of the film on IMDb. I agree with him. I think for many queers, especially in rural, small town areas, I think it probably did save their life. Because in the end, you have this resolution, and it was so unheard of at the time. And you have to remember, Victor Victoria came out later that year, and that was a complete comedy with gays and, you know, drag queens and, you know, all this other stuff. And it had a huge success rate. I mean, it was lauded as a really great gay film comedy musical that was out there. But Making Love was before that. It came out before Victor Victoria did. And so in that same year, you had this dichotomy of where one got the pass and the other one really struggled. You know, and it's unfortunate, I think, you know, because, and so I think the marketing suffered from it. I think there were a lot of knocks against it. But I will say, I love the whole thing about Roberta Flack singing the song. And I had totally forgotten that she had recorded the song until I rewatched the film. And I went, oh my God, I love this song. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And I was just so impressed when I read that story, because I knew that she was an ally. I knew that she was a very strong black woman who stood for the community, and queers loved her, gays loved her, and still do. But anyways, so with all of that, unless you have something else to add, why don't we get to your reviews?
All right. I would like to preface my reviews by saying they may feel low, but it's only low because the technology is now so old it can throw a lot of people. And the category we're missing is where I would have given it a 5. So I'll explain that at the end. Overall production, I give it a 3 because it is probably produced late 70s, came out in the early 80s. Script screenplay, also a 3, but again, it's older dialogue and it's really slow pacing. Modern audiences will be like, come on, get to something. Sound lighting score, again, they were just sort of limited in terms of technology and budget. A lot of the scenes, especially the outdoor scenes, are really dark. The love scene is really, not only really dark and shadowed, but shot through a mirror. So I gave that one a 3, just because a lot of the stuff, unless Kate Jackson was in the room, it was dark and grainy. Art direction costuming, I gave that a 4. Historically accurate because it was
The
of the time. Yeah, it was perfectly modern at the time. Casting, 5, because as we pointed out, these people knew that they were putting their lives on, or their livelihoods on the line. And I'm not talking just the actors, we're talking producers and everybody who worked on the
Across
crew.
the board, anybody affiliated with it.
They knew
Hollywood is a very small town in that way.
Yes, and they knew what they were getting into. Directing, I gave it a 4. And I'm only giving it that for modern audiences because I want you to expect an older style of directing. It would have been a 5 at the time because it was really good, but it's an older style, and that can also throw a lot of audiences, especially if you've never seen it before. Like if you're younger and had never seen that style of show, buckle up, kiddo. Queer themes presented, 4. Again, I think we've kind of outgrown the themes that were presented, but they're still valid and they still could happen. And so my personal overall rating was a 4. What I would have given a 5 is if we had a historically important category, because I think this stands at the top of the historically important list right now.
Excellent. Okay. I am going to look through it from my 18-year-old self with an eye to my future self, my present-day self, when giving these ratings. So for overall, I gave it a 5, and that includes the historical context of I remember how important this film was. The screenwriting, it is slow-paced. It is Barry Sander did, I think, the best he could given the circumstances that he was under in writing the screenplay. And I think that his approach of doing the talking head portions where they talk to the camera, I think was his way of landing a very difficult subject for the time softly.
I could see that.
And the slow pacing was to give the audience time to become invested. I think that was the intent. And I think at the time, for what it was, it really worked. You have to take what media was like at that period of time. And I think that, this was something that, I think I will give him a 4 on it with an eye to a 5, because I remember when I was young, I was really impressed that somebody wrote this marvelous of a story and it had a gay happy ending. That was another biggie thing for me.
That is huge, actually, yes. Nobody had to die.
Nobody had to die, and he didn't become like Bart. He didn't fall into the turning tricks every night. He found a partner. They were, well established. They had a nice Manhattan apartment right off Central Park. So, that things went well for him, So anyways, the screenwriter I'll give a 4. Sound lighting score for the time, a 4. It was pretty basic, and I understand. And I think when you say it was dark and it was grainy, I think part of that might have been an art direction choice to kind of give audience the impressions that everything we did was in shadow.
Maybe.
And I know that it's not the clearest ever, but you have to understand, they didn't have red cameras back then.
No, I know that. They didn't.
And so there were limitations of what they wanted to do. And I think that it was a hard call for them of how much visibly. And you know what's funny? I even mentioned this to my husband when we were watching it last night. I said, it's always funny to me that whenever they did gay films, the intimate moments were almost too dark. And yet you go to a club and it's so bright. No gay bar was like that. You know, it's the most amazing thing. And it's in several films that way. I mean, you know, it just used to drive me nuts. I'm like, clubs aren't like that. What the hell? Are you kidding? Yeah. So, you know, I find that very, very funny. But, you know, sound lighting score, I'll give it a 4. The artistic direction, I remember that at the point I was pleased that these were people who were urban professionals. That was a big thing around that time. That's when the yuppie thing started to happen.
Yep.
So I like that it involved that world, because many people, and you have to realize this is when Trump really started to put his fingers in a lot of waters. And so the whole accumulation of wealth and status was the big thing in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I
and
thought
this
it was
was when
interesting.
shows like Dynasty was popular. I mean, it's all about
Dallas,
big
yeah, it was
Dallas
all about
families,
rich people.
families with big money.
Yeah. And so it was nice to see the story told, in my opinion, for the time. I remember I was impressed that it was not, you know, lower middle class family, but it was professional, showing you can have a career, you can have a successful career, and you can still deal with these issues. And so for me, I kind of liked that aspect of it. So, you know, I gave it a 4, but casting, 5, hands down, because I think every person did their job, even the kindly old lady, Winnie, who gave Claire advice. You know, I liked her I remember I liked her as a character even when I saw it back when I was 18. I just liked the fact that Claire had someone else, you know, and that it has a full circle with Zach and Claire over Winnie's journey in the story. Direction, I gave it a 5. I think Arthur Hiller, for the time, did the absolute best job in trying to convey this story that was important to him as much as it was to Barry Sandler, who wrote the story. And again, this was many years before Philadelphia. And so and in fact, the writer from Philadelphia said he remembered going to the theater and having that same sort of experience, you know. And so it's a very interesting film from that perspective. So I gave Direction a 5. Queer Themes, I gave it a 5 because for me, in that period of time, and for the gentleman whose review I read, it literally did validate you in ways that were not happening at the time. And again, your world was so insular. Just the people you physically knew were in your world, your queer world. And so you couldn't find camaraderie afar. You know, it was literally your world wherever you were, and that was all you had to support yourself. So even chosen family could be risky or not even available to you depending upon where you lived. So I think that's one of the things I consider. So Queer Things, I gave it a 5. And even though you average it all out and there's more 4s and 5s, I'm going to give it a 5 because of its historical context and for what I went through and for what it did for so many people. So I'm going to say my overall is a 5. I'm going to adjust it up. So that's my take on it. That's Vance's take on it. We do recommend you see this. Take all of our little words of caution about the film. Don't expect the modern sensibility because it is the late 70s when it was filmed and 82 when it came out. So there's that to consider. You were going to say something?
Nope. I was going to offer the grains of salt that you just offered. So.
Okay. So that's it for this review of Making Love. We do say find a copy. If you're game to purchase it, I'm sure you can find it on Amazon, on DVD. I'm not sure if Redbox has it or one of the other DVD services.
They're still doing those?
I don't. Yeah, I still see them at 7-Elevens and stuff. They're still there.
Right. Fair enough.
So, maybe they have them, but Vans has an excellent option. Check your local libraries. And even if it's not in the library in your area, often libraries within a certain system will ship things around according to requests. So just see if it's in a library in your area, anywhere in your area, and they may be able to bring it in so you can view it. So that's another way to work the system. But definitely one we recommend that you watch. So next week we have a newish release. It was released about a couple months ago. No, actually it was released this month.
This month, yeah.
It's on Netflix. A couple
weeks ago.
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
That was on Prime.
Oh no, it is. You're right. Okay, it was on Prime, Amazon Prime, and it is the film version of a stage musical that was presented in the West End in England, and it had rave reviews as a play, a musical play, and this is the filmed version of that. And I think it has the same lead actor. I can't remember if it is the same actor. It may not be, because often musicals that are filmed don't have the same actors. It's they recast them. So, but anyways, we're doing Everybody's Talking About Jane. And it looks to be a fun romp. I've not seen it. It's not one that I've viewed before, and Vance hasn't seen it. So we'll be watching it this week with fresh eyes and give our comments next week. So until then, remember to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about these reviews. If you find them valuable, please give us a like. It really helps us. And think about subscribing. It's we're doing this and as a service and trying to give people a well-rounded we'll actually, we post every time our ratings, and we also give you the Rotten Tomatoes ratings and the IMDb score as of the recording of the episode. If there's a movie you'd like us to review, please put it down in the comments. We'll take it to heart very seriously, and we will add it to our burgeoning list of movies to watch. All right? So until then, I'm Baz Collins.
And I'm Vance Bastian.
And we'll see you at the movies. Bye now.
Bye-bye.